January 5th, 1942. Two German officers stride through the stone corridors of Colditz castle, the most escape-proof prison in the entire Third Reich. Guard dogs, searchlights, armed sentries posted on every parapet, a full battalion, one soldier for every two prisoners. Field Marshal Göring himself declared this fortress unbreakable. But something about these two officers is off. Their buttons are crude lead casts, poured from stolen plumbing over candle flames. The holster is carved from linoleum floor tile. The belt is painted cardboard. One careful glance kills the whole disguise. And right now, a German sergeant sits 10 feet ahead under electric light. One of these men is British Lieutenant Neve. 6 months earlier, he attempted this exact same escape. The scenery paint on his cap glowed bright green under the searchlights. The guards didn't fire, they laughed. Tonight, every single component has been rebuilt from nothing. But here is what nobody anticipates. The man the Third Reich locked inside these walls will one day walk into Nuremberg and force those same commanders to read the charges against their own empire. What compelled him to attempt the same suicide mission a second time? And what did that first catastrophic failure burn into him? May 1940, northern France. German panzer divisions have torn through the Allied lines and are racing toward the English Channel. In the port city of Calais, a thin rearguard of British troops fights to slow the advance. Buying hours for the evacuation at Dunkirk, 26 miles northeast. Lieutenant Neve, 24 years old, fresh off a law degree from Oxford, commands a ragged collection of soldiers from the 1st Searchlight Regiment, Royal Artillery. Men he himself would later describe as an ill-assorted, randomly equipped unit, separated from their original positions and armed with whatever they could scrounge. He is not a career soldier. He is a lawyer, handed a rifle and told to hold a port city against tanks. Their mission is not to win. Their mission is to make the Germans bleed for every block, every alley, every bridge leading to the harbor, so that 300,000 men can board boats at Dunkirk. Nobody in Calais expects to go home. They are purchasing time with their own bodies so the British Army survives to fight another day. If Calais falls too quickly, the evacuation at Dunkirk collapses. Neve understands this. Every man standing beside him understands this. They are fighting to make their deaths count for something. The garrison holds fewer than 400 men against 2 full panzer divisions. Artillery barrages shake the medieval walls of the old town until dust pours from the mortar joints. Tracer rounds stitch the air red. Smoke rolls the sky into a dirty orange haze above the port. Streets are choked with abandoned vehicles, shattered glass, and men who stopped moving hours ago. Neve leads his soldiers across an open square toward the docks. A shell detonates nearby. White-hot shrapnel tears through his right thigh. He drops into burning rubble, drags himself upright, keeps moving on one good leg. His orders are simple: hold the line, whatever the cost. Around him, men fall and do not rise again. The Germans are not slowing down. Every minute Neve's rearguard holds is one more minute for the boats at Dunkirk. Every man here knows the arithmetic. On May 23, 1940, a German officer finds Neve crawling through the wreckage, uniform shredded, legs soaked in blood. The fight for Calais is over. Neve is hauled to his feet. 24 years old, wounded, a prisoner of war. From this moment, Neve has one objective: undo every part of that status. Transport trucks haul him east into Germany. He passes through Oflag 9A/H near Spangenberg Castle. Months crawl by there. He spends every one of them studying the fences, memorizing sentry rotations, cataloging every weakness he can find. February 1941, transferred to Stalag 20A near Thorn in occupied western Poland. New camp, same routine. Neve paces the perimeter like a surveyor. He maps guard intervals in his head, notes blind spots, logs shift changes. Captivity is a sentence he has zero intention of serving. April 1941. He and a fellow officer named Norman Forbes slip out of Thorn under Darkness and push east, toward Soviet-controlled territory. They move through moonless Polish forests for days, sleeping in ditches, navigating by memory and a stolen compass, eating almost nothing. Then, near a rail junction at Elk, dawn catches them in open ground. No ditch deep enough, no tree line close enough. A Gestapo car skids to a halt on the road ahead. Two officers step out, rifles leveled. Neve raises his hands. Days of frozen marching, ditches for beds, starvation rations of nothing at all, erased in 30 seconds of bad light on a country road. That second failure seals his classification. The Germans label Neve a persistent escaper, a Luftgeist, and ship him to the one facility purpose-built for men exactly like him. May 1941. His boots crack against the cobblestones of Colditz Castle's inner courtyard. The cliff drops 75 meters to the river below. Sentries salute. Prisoners stare from barred windows. The walls are 2 meters thick. Every previous escape attempt from this castle has failed. Colditz has held French generals, Polish colonels, British commando officers, men with every reason and every skill to run. Not one of them has made it home. The system is certain it finally has him locked down for good. But how do you cage a man who treats every locked door as a puzzle? Who files every failed attempt under research? What happens when the Reich's most dangerous escape artists end up in the same building and start comparing notes? Inside Colditz, the world compresses to stone corridors, barred windows, and that endless drop to the river. Winter air slices through the cells like a blade. Searchlights carve the darkness every few seconds, painting white stripes across the ceiling. Guard dogs strain at chains in the corner yards. Over 500 officers, British, French, Polish, Dutch, Belgian, share cramped sleeping quarters on hard bunks under constant surveillance. A full German battalion guards the castle. Roughly 1 soldier for every 2 prisoners. No work detail, no labor assignment. No way to move through the day with purpose. Just stone walls, head counts 4 times a day, and the knowledge that the cliff outside the window drops 75 meters to frozen water. The monotony is deliberate. Boredom, cold, overcrowding. The Germans wield them as effectively as barbed wire. But the Germans have made a catastrophic miscalculation. By concentrating every escape artist in one castle, they have built an academy of defiance. French officers who tunneled out of camps in Bavaria trade intelligence with Polish soldiers who forge documents in Silesia. Dutch prisoners run German accent coaching sessions in their cells. An escape committee, a dozen hard faces crouched beneath blankets, candlelight throwing shadows across the stone, convenes after every roll call. Their job is coordination. One group's breakout cannot compromise another's cover. Escape officers track every scheme in motion. They ration scarce supplies, dye, wire, forged documents, and enforce a strict queue so the castle doesn't erupt into simultaneous chaos. Neve sits among them, intense, quiet. Colditz is engineered to crush these men. Instead, it is welding them into a collective intelligence network more sophisticated than any single escape plan could ever be. Neve's own scheme crystallizes that summer. British prisoners stage theatrical performances in a small hall inside the castle. Concerts, plays, variety shows. German officers watch from the front rows. Beneath the theater's wooden stage, Neve and his team have mapped a route. A trap door drops into a storeroom. That storeroom connects through a ceiling passage above the guardhouse to the German side of the castle. The entire plan rests on one psychological blind spot, and it nearly succeeds. Sentries scan for prisoners scaling walls, severing wire, burrowing under floors. Nobody watches for officers walking calmly out through the German quarters. On the night of August 28, 1941, Neve pulls on his disguise. A Polish greatcoat dyed field grey. A black officer's cap slathered in scenery paint. A cardboard belt painted silver. He marches toward the guardhouse with two others. A spotlight blazes white. A guard screams, "Halt!" In the flood of the searchlight, the paint on Neve's cap fluoresces. Not dark, not dull. Bright, radioactive green, visible from 30 meters. The guards freeze. Then they burst out laughing. Paul PM, the German security officer, strolls over. He inspects the glowing cap with theatrical amusement, delivers his verdict. Corporal Neve is to be sent to the Russian front. 6 months of planning, every stolen material, every rehearsed step, betrayed by a tin of cheap paint nobody thought to test under a searchlight. Mocking salutes trail Neve down the corridor to solitary confinement. In that cell, silence presses from every wall. The humiliation cuts deeper than any punishment ever could. The concept was sound. Walk out disguised as a German officer. Exploit the one direction sentries never watch. But the execution was amateurish. Cheap paint that fluoresced under strong light. Untested materials. A rushed timeline with zero margin for error. He sits on the narrow bunk, turns the handcuffs on his wrists, makes a cold decision. The strategy survives. Every physical component gets rebuilt from scratch, stress-tested under conditions identical to the real escape, perfected before he risks his life on that same corridor again. If Colditz was designed to break defiance, it chose the wrong prisoner. He has no materials, no outside contact, no guarantee the next attempt won't end exactly the same way. But perfecting a disguise that fools trained soldiers under electric light, that is one problem. Finding a partner who speaks native quality German without a trace of British accent is a different problem entirely. Where inside this stone cage will Neve locate someone skilled enough and reckless enough to walk back through that corridor beside him? And when he does, what will it cost both of them to get it right this time? Winter 1941. Months grind past. Neve watches everything. During meals, he charts guard rotations. At roll calls, he times each sentry's patrol down to the second. He memorizes faces, rank insignia, habits. Which guard lights a cigarette at the same corner every single night? Which sergeant hangs back near the gate when rain starts falling? Which shift change drifts 3 minutes behind schedule on Sundays? He commits nothing to paper. One scrap found during a search, and everything collapses. Every observation feeds directly into memory, catalogued, cross-referenced against every other observation. A bored guard, a sloppy search, a shift change that runs like clockwork, predictable clockwork. Each gap becomes a weapon, filed away for later use. His partner surfaces from the Dutch contingent, Lieutenant Anthony Lutain, calm, sharp-eyed, and he speaks German without a single trace of foreign accent. Not careful German, not textbook German, native German, the kind that never hesitates before a word, never softens a consonant, never carries the faint melody of another language lurking beneath the surface. Neve has spent weeks vetting candidates, quiet conversations in corners of the exercise yard, listening for that one tiny stumble, the hesitation that would get them both shot at the first checkpoint. Lutain has none. Neve brings the stubborn audacity, Lutain brings the linguistic precision. Together, they form a unit engineered to exploit the single flaw Neve identified back in August. The assumption that no prisoner would dare walk out through the German side of the castle dressed as one of their own. They discard every trace of the first attempt. Nothing improvised this time. A Dutch overcoat is stripped apart, re-dyed, and tailored to the exact shade of Wehrmacht Feldgrau. Scraps of lead plumbing are pried from castle walls, melted over smuggled candle stubs, and poured into hand-carved button molds. Neve blows on each cooling button until the weight and sheen match genuine German brass. Linoleum ripped from dormitory floors gets boiled, shaped, and rubbed until it passes for a leather holster. A belt assembled from cardboard is painted and buffed until it gleams like regulation issue. Every component is inspected by candlelight, then inspected again under a hoarded electric torch. They work through lightless hours past dawn, reconstructing the same disguise that failed before. But this time, each piece can survive more than a glance. Consider subscribing if this story grips you. Most viewers watching right now haven't yet, and one tap helps these stories reach more people. The disguise was complete. Now they needed a way out. The escape route gets its own overhaul. Beneath the theater stage, they've carved a trapdoor leading down into a storeroom. From the storeroom, a corridor runs directly above the German guardhouse and opens onto the officers' courtyard on the Nazi side of the castle. The plan's audacity is its own camouflage. Sentries watch for prisoners scaling walls, cutting wire, tunneling beneath floors. No one watches for two German officers strolling calmly through the front gate. Beyond Colditz Castle, a Dutch prisoner captured near the Swiss border town of Singen has supplied critical intelligence: Gestapo checkpoint patterns, crossing points, timing. This man walked the exact roads Neve and Lutain intend to use. He knows which platforms run permanent identity checks and which only search travelers on market days. He knows the 2-kilometer stretch of border wire near Singen where the patrol gap runs longest. He was caught, but he was caught making a different mistake, on a different road. Neve and Lutain memorize every detail: train schedules, border patrol timings, the names of every town where identity checks squeeze tightest. The date locks into place: January 5, 1942. That evening, British prisoners mount a theatrical performance inside Colditz Castle. German officers settle into the front rows. A single drowsy guard watches the gate. And backstage, hidden in the darkness above the stage, 4 men wait. Neve, Lutain, 1 British officer, 1 Dutch officer. Their uniforms are pressed crisp. Forged papers sit folded in breast pockets. Lead buttons catch the barest sliver of light. The curtain drops on the final act. Applause swells through the hall. Somewhere below them, a guard yawns. 5 months of obsessive, painstaking preparation. Every hour Neve has poured into this moment now balances on the next 90 seconds. 5 months of memorizing guard rotations, testing button molds by candlelight, drilling German phrases until they roll off the tongue without a flicker of hesitation. 1 flawed button ends it. 1 guard who looks a bit too long ends it. 1 card player who wanders into the hallway for a cigarette at the wrong second ends it. Because there is a variable Neve cannot control. The trapdoor passes directly over a room where German soldiers play cards deep into the night. If a single one of them steps into that corridor, 4 men in counterfeit uniforms are standing exactly where no prisoner on earth should be. And even if the disguise holds, what waits on the other side of the wire? Applause rumbles through the theater as the final curtain falls. German officers clap politely from the front rows. The last stagehands drift off stage. Above, in the darkness, 4 men crouch over the trapdoor. Neve pulls the rope. The hatch swings wide. They drop into the storeroom below. A plank groans under the impact. But the sound dissolves beneath the clapping, still vibrating through the floorboards. Light bleeds from the hallway beyond. They press flat against the wall. Listen. Silence. They push through a metal door and step into the corridor above the guardhouse, the German side of Colditz Castle. territory where no prisoner has any right to breathe. Neve straightens the Feldgrau coat on his shoulders. Lutain adjusts his officer's cap. In barely audible German, they exchange the parole word, a phrase overheard from a guard 3 weeks earlier. Below them, a sergeant hunches over his desk, scratching out reports. 2 officers descend the staircase. The sergeant glances up, nods without interest, returns to his paperwork. Neve and Lutain cross to a small door and push through into the outer courtyard. Cold air floods their lungs in a single sharp breath. A solitary sentry stands at ease beneath the stone archway, separating the castle from the world beyond it. Neve's pulse hammers against his throat. They carry themselves like officers returning from late duty, unhurried, shoulders square, boots striking flagstones in a confident, measured rhythm. The sentry's eyes track them. He hesitates. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then they pass beneath the arch and through the gate. Walking in the one direction no escaper in the history of Colditz has ever gone, straight out the front door of the German command block. Bitter wind slams their faces. They drop into the dry moat, scramble across, scale the outer wall into Colditz Park. Moonlit trees swallow them whole. They tear off the German caps and coats, stuffing them beneath brush, revealing civilian clothes layered underneath, worn jackets, shabby hats, the disguise of Westphalian factory workers. Lutain grins in the darkness. They have just walked out of the most secure prison in the Third Reich in under 5 minutes. Now they split up, halving the risk. Neve boards a freight train at Litznik before the sun breaks. A German newspaper spread across his lap. Camouflage, nothing more. A regional line carries him south. Every station platform is a coin toss. A conductor who looks too long. A policeman whose eyes linger. A checkpoint nobody mentioned. At Ulm, he switches trains for Singen, the last German town before Switzerland. Outside Singen, he finds Lutain again near a forest road. 2 Hitler youth boys block the path, rifles slung across their shoulders. They announce they are hunting 2 escaped prisoners of war reported somewhere in the district. Neve hands over his forged papers. His hands tremble, deliberately. A nervous factory worker from Cologne, nothing interesting. The boys study the documents. One lowers his rifle. The other shrugs, waves them through. The 2 men they are searching for stand 5 feet away, then walk off unchallenged. Midnight. They reach the border wire. Snow blankets the ground, pale beneath a thin moon. They crawl through tangled barbed wire in freezing darkness. Coats catch on rusted barbs. Hands go numb, clawing uphill inch by inch towards Swiss territory. The temperature has plunged well below zero. Altitude comes in fractions. Neve's fingers bleed against frozen metal. Then the ground levels out. A signpost materializes in the gloom. Swiss lettering. They stumble into the village of Ramsen, heart slamming so hard the sound seems to fill the empty street. A Swiss border guard sits on a bench nearby, smoking a cigarette in the cold. Neve straightens up, walks over on shaking legs, claps the startled man on the shoulder, muttering broken Swiss German. 84 hours have passed since the trapdoor opened beneath the theater stage at Colditz Castle. Neve is the first British officer to escape Colditz. After a brutal journey through France, over the Pyrenees, and via Gibraltar, he reaches England and receives the military cross. But Colditz was never the destination. It was the proving ground. What do you do with a man who memorized every corridor of an escape-proof castle and walked straight through it wearing the enemy's uniform? What happens when the Reich that once locked him away finally crumbles, and someone has to step into its ruins and face the man who built it? MI9 recruits Neve immediately. This covert branch runs escape networks across occupied Europe, the Pauline line through southern France, the Comet line through Belgium, and over the Pyrenees into Spain. Neve, codenamed Saturday, designs the tools that keep these lifelines functioning. Compasses hidden inside buttons, silk maps stitched into coat linings, forged documents smuggled into prison camps inside hollowed-out chess pieces. He sketches every corridor of Colditz from memory. Those drawings arm MI9 with floor plans for future operations. He trains downed aircrews in evasion, the exact methods that carried him from Saxony to Switzerland. By war's end, the networks Niv helps operate have guided roughly 7,000 Allied airmen and soldiers out of occupied Europe and back to Britain. The man who once crawled through barbed wire alone now orchestrates freedom at industrial scale. Then comes the reckoning. Nazi Germany collapses in 1945. The victors demand justice. The regime's most powerful leaders sit locked in cells at Nuremberg. The same man who once caged Niv behind 2-meter walls. Niv is chosen to personally serve the indictments, cell by cell, face to face. Picture the geometry of that moment, 3 years earlier. These men decided whether Niv ate, whether he slept, whether he froze to death behind barbed wire. Now the former prisoner carries documents that will decide whether they live or hang. Grey dawn light seeps into the prison corridor. Niv holds a stack of heavy packets, formal charges from the International Military Tribunal. Each one cataloging specific atrocities tied to the man waiting behind the cell door. First cell, Hermann Göring, former Reichsmarshal, the second most powerful man in the Third Reich. Göring swings his legs off the cot, reaches for the papers with theatrical disdain. Niv slides the indictment through the grill, watches Göring's eyes crawl down the pages. Cell by cell, Niv moves down the row. Rudolf Hess mumbles, incoherent, barely present. Albert Speer's jaw tightens into a hard line. Wilhelm Keitel goes white. In each dim cell, Niv reads the defendant's name in German, places the documents on the table, signs the receipt of service. The man who once begged for scraps of bread behind stone walls now holds the pen that opens the largest war crimes trial in human history. After Nuremberg, Niv steps back into civilian life. He wins the Conservative seat for Abingdon in a 1953 by-election. Serves quietly in Parliament for 2 decades. In 1974, he manages Margaret Thatcher's campaign for the Conservative Party leadership. By 1979, he is her Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, positioned to enter the cabinet the moment the Conservative Party wins the coming election. March 30, 1979, Westminster, London. Niv finishes a day's work at the House of Commons, walks to his car. A magnetic bomb, fixed beneath the chassis by an Irish National Liberation Army operative, detonates as the car climbs the exit ramp. The explosion rips through the vehicle in full view of Parliament. Eiry Niv, the man who survived shellfire at Calais, the Gestapo at Elk, the stone corridors of Colditz, dies 100 yards from the House of Commons, weeks before the election that will sweep Thatcher into Downing Street. He never sees it. The cabinet seat he earned stays empty. That afternoon, Margaret Thatcher stands before cameras. Her voice breaks. She calls Niv an incalculable loss. The Irish National Liberation Army is subsequently banned across the United Kingdom. His story answers the question it posed at the very beginning. A man stood in a stone corridor wearing a uniform stitched from lead scraps, linoleum, and painted cardboard, and walked through the most secure prison in the Third Reich, because he refused to accept that any wall was final. He failed once, studied that failure with forensic discipline, rebuilt every component, walked the same corridor again. Then he freed thousands. Then he carried indictments into the cells of the men who once imprisoned him. Every locked door, Calais, Thorn, Colditz, Nuremberg, he treated not as a fate to accept, but as a problem to solve. The walls only hold if you believe in them. Niv never did.